taking a big bite today with the idea that that'll be expanded upon even further. So there's so much to talk about in the world of AI, guys. And so I guess the first thing on our list today was to talk about why AI in many organizations, as it's being trialed and tested and put in, is failing. And what are the preemptive measures that companies can do to better align it? What are your thoughts on that?
Thomas, the probably the number one that I've seen, number one issue that I've seen is just it's kind of cliche, but it's just a failure to prepare. There's not a clear expectation of what we're wanting to accomplish with AI, and so without that clear expectation and understanding of what we're looking to accomplish and what that's going to look like, there's just there's too many things that can go wrong.
I would, I was
Go ahead.
about to say, I would say it's part of the innovation gap problem. Typically, when groups launch into AI, there's a cheerleading squad or somebody who has the next way to slice the bread, and that innovation group separates itself from the rest of the organization, and the gap just gets bigger and bigger rather than smaller and smaller. And that can be represented by internal politics or just the general culture of the organization that doesn't really embrace that innovation team and the concept.
Yeah, and from just looking at the data perspective, most organizations have some type of legacy system that they're trying to migrate into the current system. And then adding AI on top of that, they're simply not ready from a data structure perspective because data is spread across different entities, different departments. HR might have one set of data, operations has multiple databases depending on what they do inside the company, and everybody has their own set of data. And when you implement AI into it, AI needs good data to be able to do something with. If your data source coming into AI is very siloed, or even from legacy systems and so on, AI can't make good decisions because it's so blindfolded into looking at one direction, and it makes some horrible decisions. So, everybody wants to jump in it. It's the great thing to do, but you have to understand garbage in, garbage out. AI needs solid data in the background. And if companies don't have that holistic data framework, it doesn't necessarily work too well.
Agreed. I would add to that the key thing that I find when we get into these conversations with organizations that all want to bring in AI as soon as possible for all sorts of reasons, they don't know why specifically. So they don't have a goal, they don't have an objective, and they don't actually have a hard, proven, worked out strategy or reason to do so in the first place, right? So the idea of bringing in AI on this broad basis, it's going to improve our efficiency, it's going to cut our costs, it's going to save our people time so they can do things that are more valuable and productive for the organization. Those are all great ideas. But the question is where and specifically how within the organization are you going to implement those ideas? And as such, who then ends up being on the teams as related to those initiatives? And should you be doing more than one initiative in a given time? And then you can start to bring in all of these other factors that are important for the successful implementation of AI. But if you don't start with a goal and you don't start with an objective, it's pretty difficult to build KPIs around an empty room. So we really need to start there and then work down. Does that make sense?
No, I think you're right on, Thomas. There's no question that again, it's just you more eloquently expressed what I was trying to express as well. It's just that there's so much that has to go in at the beginning in order to have a successful implementation. And it's not to say that you don't move forward quickly. I really like my military background. It was always ready, aim, fire. And what I learned in business is that it really is ready, fire, aim. You've got to pull the trigger, you've got to fire, and then you've got to adjust. And so it's not that you wait forever to have everything get perfect, but there does have to be a plan. There's got to be something at the beginning for what this is going to do, why you're implementing it, and then there's going to be adjustments. So you're going to pull the trigger and then you're going to adjust, but there's got to be at least a general plan before you pull the trigger.
Totally agree. I've got a group that we're meeting with now, and we take a look at their tech stack and what they think is their tech stack versus what is actually their tech stack. And what I mean by that, they think as an organization, they've allotted these certain technologies and solutions and platforms across the organization that they're using. But when we dig into those silos that you were talking about, Ted, we find out that those silos have additional applications running in the background and different technologies. And that tech stack doesn't look anything like the organization really thinks it does, because they're all doing a little bit of this and that. It's not coordinated. It's not planned. It's actually making a mess. And from a security and compliance standpoint, it's very dangerous. So the idea of going into this without a cohesive plan and organizing the company in that respect is pretty scary. And that's what I see. Barry, what are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with you there. There's case after case of so many what we would describe as traditional or laggard organizations that teams are adopting different technology and they are quite literally running the company on a parallel platform, taking that information, that work product, and putting it back into the legacy tool. And many times the people that are then using it inside the company, they believe that they're on whatever legacy system is, but in reality, they have a manual process of teams importing and exporting data back and forth and doing things against the rules, because what they're doing with these other parallel systems from their viewpoint as the team member is faster, more efficient, but it might not be under regulatory control. It might not be meeting compliance issues. It might not have data security, all of these things, but it does work 100 times faster. And it might actually be working 100 times faster because it doesn't have those things.
Right. Right. And we're going to get into some of that a little later, by the way, with some of the, I don't know how to phrase it, scary stories as to some of the problems that AI has created, but as well some of the incredible success stories. And it's a combination of two. And we're going to find as we look at those that they come back to much of what we're talking about now. That is those who have planned it and moved ahead accordingly and strategically, as opposed to those that have just haphazardly jumped into it and hope for the best, if that makes sense. Right. So what are some of the goals and concepts and objectives, guys, that organizations should be considering in order to move forward with AI as their next step? What are the goals they might have?
I mean, for myself as a flagship item, my North Star is how do you grow and protect the team and your customer base. There are so many uses of AI that can actually improve the well-being of the entire structure, rather than allow the AI strategy to be controlled by the finance department or the investor stockholders, which will always demand efficiency cuts rather than creating basically a rising tide for everyone.
Yeah, I think the key is efficiency. With AI, it could crunch documents to no end with a lot of great insights that a human being would just take hours and hours and still can't produce the same results. So, let me give you a very simple example. I think a lot of organizations try to go into AI with very high level strategic objectives, and they forget what's happening at the ground level. And if you talk to any individual in any department, what's the biggest challenge you face? You take that particular challenge and attach AI to and solve that practical problem. It can be extremely efficient. So, take the HR work, for example. They're recruiting people, they post a job, they get thousands of resumes, and the HR guys have to go through the resumes, find the best candidate, and so on. Well, we've built systems where we can use AI to take that time of looking at all these resumes, easily identifying what are the key skill sets these resumes have, what are the key skill sets we're looking for, and very quickly identify your top candidates just from a resume review perspective, right? And then we can go into the interviewing, recording interviewing, analyzing the data from the interviews and so forth, and come up with key insights to see if the insight align with what's said in the resume, so that people can be checked from an ethical perspective, as well as hire the right person, the right job, and so on. So taking it from a very practical perspective, efficiency can be a huge aspect and outcome for application of AI.
To that point, and I think you made a great example there with respect to HR and one of the actual examples of how they could use AI to become more efficient within that department. But as an organization, should we be doing those kinds of things departmentally as well? And then have all of those initiatives lined up at the end with respect to what they achieved and the ROIs that we might look at and consider?
So we almost have to put on different hats to answer that question.
Right.
As an executive at the C level, you don't want your different departments going into different ways of looking at different things.
Right.
But at the department level, you want your people to be more innovative, right? It's kind of like the McDonald's situation where, you know, the Big Mac, where did the Big Mac come from? And if you want your subsidiaries all over the country, all over the globe to innovate with new recipes and so forth, but yeah, you want to control your recipe. Same thing here at the organizational level. It's a very tough balance between the executive strategic level versus what's actually happening at the ground level. So there has to be an innovation system. And I teach this quite often to a lot of executives, like, what is your innovation system? How do you take ideas from the ground level that really makes an impact to the business every single day and move it up to the chain from the individual innovation to team to department to organization? How do we wrap that into a larger macro level strategy? So they have to be in conversation on a regular basis, but the innovation can't be contained too much by the executive level, because the executives don't have any clue what's going on at the lower levels.
That's a great point. You know, and a question that comes to mind is as you're explaining that, and anybody can jump in with this one as well. And that is, do you think it's better for an organization to start internally rather than externally? And what I mean by that is internal efficiencies, internal operational opportunities versus customer experience and the external world, right? We were talking about earlier, and I'll just use the example now because it's apropos, with respect to one of the horror stories. And there's a company out of Canada called Air Canada. Everybody might be familiar with Air Canada, right? And Air Canada had put in an AI-based open generative AI into their system on their front website for customer interface, for people to query their questions. And they had a customer a couple of years back now, not even a couple of years, who queried their availability to rebook flights and change their schedules based upon a death in their family and a scenario of that kind. And they got an answer back from the AI based system that told them that was no problem. They could retroactively go back and do that. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case. AI thought it was a great idea, but Air Canada didn't. And in fact, that didn't work out. It went to court, and it just recently came and was decided that Air Canada is at fault for that, and the customer will be reimbursed, and of course, whatever costs and bad PR, and that's where the real cost is, of course, happened with that. And that's why I asked that question. It's just me talking out loud, but it seems to me if you get your ducks in order internally and you understand the good, the bad, and the ugly about the different ways you can use AI, whether it's generative, right, or whether it's more fenced in a manner by which you're controlling the data that it's utilizing. If you do that internally, then you're going to be much better prepared to do those external types of applications for AI when it comes to customer experience or even sales and marketing. But that's just my thought. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
My answer is always prep the kitchen and make sure they can handle the emerging customers that are going to flow through the doors. And if you immediately put 500 new customers in the restaurant and you haven't prepped the kitchen to handle that load, it's going to break. So always build internally first, unless there's an extraordinary market circumstance that is driving you to really address that front of the house scenario.
I would say, Thomas, in my mind, the first issue is just identifying the problem you want to solve.
Yeah.
You know, AI is a great tool, but at the same time, it's just that, it's a tool. And so what's the problem that we're looking to solve? And then that may be an external facing problem
or
the opportunity that we want to take advantage of. True, great point. Thank you. You know, it's a problem to solve or an opportunity to take advantage of. What is that? And then how do we bring AI or any other tools in to solve or to take advantage of it? And it may be that that's an external facing issue, but as Barry mentioned, part of the prep work is to prepare our internal team to be able to handle that appropriately. So I think it can go either direction, but it's to my mind at least, it's identifying first what is the problem or the opportunity that we're wanting to take advantage of.
Yeah, and if we look at the Air Canada case, the problem they probably wanted to solve was to save labor costs on customer interactions, right? So they put a bot in there, saves them hundreds of thousands of dollars hiring all these people in the back end. But what they didn't look at is what information does AI have access to? And going back to the previous topic on having the right set of data, AI probably doesn't have information on the financial system. There could be a financial problem in the process to refund customers. There's so many checks and balances in the financial systems in every single major company. The AI doesn't have information on that. AI may not have information on profit margins. AI may not have a lot of information on the operational side of things and how that may actually work out. So there's so many layers. So when you put an AI in front of it, AI is going to make the best decision possible to its capabilities, but it's not going to really understand exactly how it's going to operate from a practical perspective, knowing what's happening in the company. Like the whole external piece, it is relatively dangerous. And I see even in major companies, they don't have a software development cycle in place. There's no alpha testing, there's no beta testing. You kind of mimic it, jump, throw it in there. Oh, AI will figure it all out. Where the internal side, you can do all kinds of testing, but when you do it internally, there's still also a danger, right? I teach executives all the time. Your first line of customers for executives, for leaders, is the people that work for you, that work with you, your teams. Most organizations are struggling with some type of internal retention issues. You can't screw it up that bad either. Okay. Yes, you can't screw it up with your customers, but when every organization is struggling with some type of talent retention, you can't screw it up either. So you still got to have a software development process in place to say, hey, here's a small pilot group. Let me test it in alpha mode. Then you go to beta testing and so on. There has to be specific software development procedures that gets implemented for AI to work properly from an internal perspective as well.
Well, and I would also throw out to give you one of these story context areas that Air Canada gives a great example of what a cyber hack looks like, because as soon as you take any question and you attach the word human life or human death to it, that pushes that algorithmically for almost every AI framework out there, that is the ultimate end of the scale, that the system needs to respect that human life is the 100 score. And so if you ask it a question about a medical emergency, healthcare records, or death, it's going to default that is a good idea to give you a discount. Whatever you ask for, it is a good idea if death is involved, that whatever other item you attach it to is great. And so that's an area that red teaming cybersecurity teams with large language models and whatnot, they're actually attaching that type of phrase saying, if this doesn't happen today, so-and-so is going to die, or the airplane's going to crash. And that will force the LLM to actually score it super high on the ethics scale and override other precautions that somebody might have put in place.
Great points. Great points. Is it, what I'm hearing, guys, from a strategic perspective, if I'm the organization listening in and I'm thinking about what we're saying in terms of how they can incorporate it, is it a good suggestion to go to every one of your departments and those silos that we want to eliminate by way of silos in the first place, but nonetheless, go to your team leaders and tell them to come back to you with a case study with respect to their area and how they might use AI within their areas in order to improve their model from an ROI perspective, or from an efficiency perspective, or from the human element perspective, or from a leadership perspective, whatever it may be, and come back as a whole, as the leadership and the executive team, and prioritize those case studies against the objectives of the organization, and then start to implement in a strategic way that has the kind of impact in the organization overall that we're looking for. Is that a good start, or would you look at it from a different perspective?
I think that's a great description of what should happen and what needs to happen, Thomas. I would just add one point to that, and that being, I would be curious to find out what people, individuals in those departments are currently doing already with AI. There's going to be those individuals that are tech savvy or just curious, that are already out there querying and using Chat GPT to come up with this report or that report. And so I would be curious as a leader to find out where people are already using AI that may not be company sanctioned or company implemented with policies, but that it's in place and being used already.
It's a great point. And Barry, in addition to that, I would add this for you specifically, with respect to the fact that, depending upon the industry and the nature of the organization involved, the number of people working remotely is enormous. And that only compounds this discussion, doesn't it?
It compounds it, and it also opens up an entire conversation around how many people are actually capable of applying AI to their department. So I would, in addition to starting with your concept, I would also make sure that each team or department has access to somebody who can serve as their technology, AI, innovation sort of go-to counselor. So some teams are going to have that inherent skill set and understanding already. Your CTO and the tech team probably has a few AI people or technologists already involved. But if you go into the HR side of the equation or your supply chain management team, they might not have any capability whatsoever. The other area around remote workers is enabling somebody to peer into the other group and actually play a little musical chairs with your executives and ask department heads or department team leaders to provide AI recommendations for a team sitting next to them. Because what that will require you to do is to upskill your executives and have a lot of cross training between the teams. And it's the cross training area from my perspective where the things that they recommend from outside of the team are also the things that an AI or an external IT vendor is going to come out and try to recommend too. And if you don't understand how those external recommendations impact your org, you may suffer a lot when you start dealing with consulting firms or large vendor shops that just want to take a chainsaw to your entire organization, not understanding that they're gutting your business.
Yeah, I think there's a real risk to that. Ted, I put this one to you. With respect to leadership and the executive teams, where on the whole do you think they are as a group by way of their understanding of AI and the concepts that we're talking about and the manner by which they can take advantage of bringing it into their organizations?
Yeah, most of the executives I talk to, it seems like their knowledge of AI is relatively limited. They've seen the big articles, they've seen the big cheerleader marketing pieces here and there, but they don't really know what exactly will do and can do. And we get into some serious conversations where if you go and implement AI right away, you're going to scare the crap out of a lot of people, because some people will say it's going to take my job. I'm not going to do this, no matter how great it sounds. Where other people will say, well, this is going to be great. It's going to make my job a lot easier. I have to work less hours. And so the conversation becomes a lot more of education and skill sets across the entire organization. I'm glad James and Barry both mentioned the whole, cross training and skills. Whatever initiative you want to take on, does the organization have the knowledge and skills to do this? Right? You ask that of every single level, your department heads, your team lower level managers, supervisors, do they have the knowledge to do this? And if they don't, get a company to customize some type of education that is specifically applied to your organization and how AI may be able to help. That's the key conversation that needs to happen, not the standard, well, let me go take a certificate course. I mean, there's tons of certificate courses out there about AI, and half of them are great information, but they don't actually teach you anything that you can remember or apply to your business. So people walking around with certificates in AI, I can create, my open chat bots and so on. Great. What do you do for your business? What do you do? What did you do with it? And when you ask them, it's a couple of weeks later, they don't remember half of it. So there has to be some type of education of development and skills that people can really retain that information and apply it. And with executives, we go through a lot of conversations about the challenges they face. You know, what's the greatest challenge you face in your life currently? Okay, now we take that, and now how does AI apply to this situation? What can AI do at different levels, different models? And we break that down using systems thinking to go into details on every little thing. And then we establish metrics to say, if you did this, here's what it should measure, and here's what the expected outcome should look like. So there's not a detailed conversation. It's a one-on-one conversation, not a group conversation. Because in a group, every executive is like, oh yeah, I've read about AI. I know about AI. You know, every executive wants to look good in front of every other executive. And there's always competition for budget, for political clout in every organization. So the one-on-one conversations about AI gets to be a lot more intimate, a lot more practical.
Great points. Great points. So what you're suggesting, if I hear correctly, is that leadership on the whole needs an education,
Yes.
right? Now, this has moved so quickly with respect to the proliferation of AI as a concept, but certainly AI as solutions coming out every day before we wake up. There's 3 new solutions that have been introduced for this, that, or the other thing. So how do you keep up, and what's the best way for executives and leaders at all levels to learn quickly and understand how it may or may not apply to their business?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you guys talked about earlier, knowing the goal you have in mind. There's going to be, you know, just like any other software application, whether it's Salesforce or, you know, any application, Workday, one of the most horrific systems out there that so many companies use because of the marketing, because of decisions made. But these software tools are developed by techies, and the techies don't know what's actually going on in the specific business and how you're going to use it. So at any level, executives need to say, here's a challenge I want to solve. Here's a specific application. Let me go find something or build something internally that works for this particular case. So I know what it should do and what it needs to do, and permeate that through the entire organization or the entire department, or whatever the scale that may be. As opposed to, let me go grab something off the shelf and stick it into my organization where half the people is going to love it, half the people is going to hate it, and people will quit over it. So you have to really be careful how you go about doing that.
Right, right. What do you think about that, James?
Well, I was just going to comment, Thomas, innovation changes so quickly. You know, if you look at the rate of innovation today versus 100 years ago, it's incredible, the difference. You know, we do in seconds what took years to be accomplished in the past. And so innovate, and that's going to continue. You know, we're innovating faster and faster and faster every day. And so I think the question in my mind is not what's new today, but again, it just goes back to really having that clarity on what are my issues, and does all of this new stuff matter to me? Because there's a lot of innovation out there, but not all of it applies to my problem and what I'm trying to accomplish. So it really, in my mind, it does come back to clarity on what is my issue, what am I trying to solve, and then finding the tools that help me solve that problem. Not just what's the newest, what's the shiniest, you know, what has the greatest marketing, you know, to Ted's point, but really what is the tool that's going to help solve my problem? And that may be a tool that was released 6 months ago. It may not be the one that was just released last night. But if it solves my problem, I don't care if it's 6 months old, it solves my problem today.
And I would throw in that understanding your market and where your applied strategies are going to take place is really critical in staying ahead of the innovation wave. So when I say that, if you look at the data and regulatory frameworks at the state, federal, global levels, things are changing so quickly. You know, an example is with everything from GDPR to legislation in the EU, if you're a global organization, to the US, just in the HR space, on average, there are 1 to 2 pieces of weekly legislation at the state level affecting HR. And so if you don't have to deal with some types of markets, if you know you just work in Texas, or if you know you're just restricted to a certain specific country, make sure you understand that cycle of innovation and prep your team to run on that treadmill rather than run on the treadmill at the global scale or the federal scale or the local scale. If you miss what market you're addressing in innovation, your team's going to fail. They're going to fall off the treadmill and get crushed.
I agree.